Welcome, everyone, to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on today's episode of Battle for the Big East, we're going to talk about the St. John's Red Storm with Troy Mauriello. Troy, how are you today?
I'm hanging in there, man. Thank you for having me on again. Always appreciate it.
Yes, St. John's, they're one of the most unique programs in St. John's. They're in the Big East. They're one of the original schools to join the Big East. They've had their ups, they've had their downs. But so far, how do you rate their 2020-2021 season so far, Troy?
Yeah, well, recently it's been more downs than ups for this program for sure. It's kind of been more of the same. They've had a couple of nice wins, most notably Tuesday night against Butler. But, at the end of the day, it's kind of what we expected, or at least what I think the coaches in this conference expected, near the bottom of the Big East. They're in that class right now with Butler, with DePaul, with Georgetown, kind of the bottom four teams it looks like in the conference. I definitely wouldn't call it a successful season, but obviously there's a lot more to be played. There's a lot of opportunities to kind of jump up into that next level, maybe that middle of the pack in the Big East, where they really haven't been for a couple of years now, outside of the one tournament appearance a couple of years ago. They haven't been in that middle of the pack. So there's definitely some room to grow. But for now, I would say they're kind of where you would have expected them to be, which is kind of a bottom of the road Big East team.
Yeah, it looks like that number 9 ranking. It looks like the Big East coaches kind of knew what they were talking about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But let's start talking about, first off, let's talk about some of the newcomers that came to St. John's. They kind of got a little bit of a smorgasbord. They got a grad transfer in Toro. They got some JUCO guys in Cole and Moore, and then they got some freshmen in Posh Alexander and Dylan Adewusu. How do you think the newcomers have been so far?
Yeah, I think Posh Alexander has really given them, exactly what they would have expected, out of him in his first season. He makes some mistakes. He makes some freshman mistakes, sure. But overall, I think he's really lived up to the expectations. Tuesday night against Butler, he was phenomenal on the defensive end. You see that he's the type of player that's going to fit in the Mike Anderson system. And if he can, do things like hit a couple of threes like we saw him do, if he can add that to his arsenal, I think, he can be, an all Big East level player maybe in year 3 and year 4. But for now, he's definitely, on pace with what we expected. Dylan Adewusu as well. I think, he's been a good role player for them. And I think, maybe year 2, year 3, year 4, if he is a 4-year player, can be a guy who can be a good, rotational piece for them. Maybe not necessarily a starter, but a guy who can be a good piece for them, which is, I think, what you would have expected coming in. The 2 JUCO guys, Vince Cole, we've seen his moments. He had a couple of nice moments against Butler, hitting that long shot before halftime, obviously. But, Vince, I would like to see the shot selection improve a little bit. He had a couple of big games at the start of the year, and then, has kind of tailed off. He's kind of had a couple of games where it feels like, he's taken 3 or 4 shots, it feels like. I'd like to see him get a little bit more involved. Isaiah Moore, obviously, has been a little bit disappointing. I think recently, obviously, being suspended or not playing in the most recent game. I'd like to see his shot selection improve because the talent is there with Isaiah for sure. It's just kind of putting it together, being maybe a little bit more of a team player in terms of your shot selection, because the athleticism is certainly there. Arnaldo Toro has disappointed, I think, for sure. Most St. John's fans would agree. He's done some nice things. I actually like his ability as a passer, believe it or not. But on the defensive end, he's not a very good, a Big East level defender for sure. And, you saw Josh Roberts got some playing time against Butler and really shined and kind of showed you the difference between Roberts and Toro. So Toro's been a little bit disappointing for sure.
Well, I think with Toro, when you look at Toro and Roberts, both of them are forward positions, but both of them are 2 different types of forwards.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Roberts is more the rim protector, would be a little more athletic, but I think Toro would probably be better in a more man-to-man setup where you got a strong post presence, which, St. John's is going to go up against. I mean, one guy who scares me is Nate Watson.
Yeah.
Who's having a great season so far in the Big East.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, Providence is on a losing streak. So if you're a St. John's fan, that means they'll be nice and angry when they play him.
Yeah.
But let's talk about some of the returning players,
Sure.
which I think is also intriguing. You have Julian Champagny, who's having a great season. You also kind of had Greg Williams, Marcellus Erlington, Josh Roberts. How would you rate their season so far?
Yeah, Julian has been, incredible. anything that you could have expected from him, he has totally, outshined those expectations. He's playing at an all Big East level right now. I'm not sure if he's still leading the conference in scoring, but I know that he was for a while there at 20.7 points per game. Leads the team in rebounding as well. Just, is doing it all for them, has really developed that 3-point shot. I feel like, from the corner, he's been lethal from 3-point range this season. He looks like a guy that, is an all Big East level type player where, again, if in year 3 or year 4, if he does get far, at least in year 3, hopefully, he can be, a Big East player of the year type player and a centerpiece on a contending team in the Big East. So, you feel like you're kind of wasting his talents a little bit right now, but he's certainly been incredible. Greg, again, I just want to see the confidence from him. He has the ability to hit shots, to drive to the basket. I just want to see that confidence from Greg. Rasheem Dunn's another guy too, who has kind of like quietly been pretty good for them this season. He's scoring, I think, a little over 7 points per game. But has been pretty good on the defensive end and has had a couple of good games. I know the Seton Hall game he played well. He played well against Butler as well. So, Rasheem's been good. He's been a good leader for them as well. So, all in all, the returns have been all right. I'd like to see a little bit more from Marcellus Earlington. I'd like to see him get going a little bit more to that form that we saw at the end of last season. And obviously, I'd love to see Josh Roberts continuing to play because, like you mentioned, he's a rim protector that St. John's doesn't have. When he's on the court, at least, it's not an automatic layup if someone gets into the lane like it is, with some other guys on the court. So I'd like to see Roberts getting some more playing time, in the future. And I think he will at this point now.
Yeah. And also too, it's, I listened to your rapid reaction last night and you talked about St. John's trying to find the right lineup. Mm-hmm. What do you think would be the right combination going forward for St. John's? Like the best five?
Yeah, it's tough because, they have so many guys who can step in. They're a deep team. They have, 10, 11 players that can play in that, in a given game. But I mentioned it last night, I think Mike sometimes kind of falls in love with that depth and stretches a little bit too wide, where you have a guy like Dylan Adai-Wusu, Arnaldo Toro on the court at the same time. That kind of, hampers your offense a little bit, almost ties one hand behind your back. Someone like Julian, Greg, Posh, and Rasheem Dunn, like one of those guys needs to be on the court at all times. They have a lot of lineup configurations that can work. I actually like the starting lineup that they went with against Butler. It was a good one, I feel like, with Josh starting. But I think, Julian, Greg, Isaiah, or Posh Alexander and Rasheem Dunn, one of those guys has to be on the court at all times, barring no foul trouble, just to give you an option, because those are guys that can kind of score on their own. They need to have that. They can't stretch too far out where they've only got one or two guys on offense who can really, do something with the ball. So I'd like to see one of those guys at least on the court all game.
All right. Now, Troy, let me answer you this question. Now, let's try to think some areas where St. John's has gotten better from last year and one area where they got worse. Personally, from following St. John's, I think one of the places where they got better is actually in their half-court offense. Mm-hmm. They've been more consistent from three-point land. They're about like maybe low to mid-30s when I think last season they went about 5 or 6 games without hitting a three. Yeah. They hit 2, which is not good in this level of college basketball. Mm-hmm. So what do you think has been the biggest improvement from last year for the Red Storm? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll do you one better. Even just from the start of this year to where we're at right now, the half court offense has really looked better. It's no longer. I think they still shot 20 something threes in the game against Butler. I think they shot like 24 threes. Yeah, in that game. Yeah, but it didn't feel like it was forced. And even at the start of this season, in a game against BYU, if you remember, and even against Seton Hall, it felt like some of these possessions where just the ball was staying on the perimeter, not even entering the paint, and then just ending up, taking a three as the shot clock wind down. That hasn't really been the case the last couple of games. The ball's been moving a lot better. It's been on the perimeter, sure. Even last night, I'm trying to remember against the zone. I think it was Rasheem Dunn who had a really nice play where he cut to the middle of the zone, and cut and passed it back out. I mean, they're learning on the fly, I think, how to play together, which, a lot of teams obviously didn't have that off season to work together and play together on the offensive end. And for St. John's, though, the half court offense, it's starting to come together slowly but surely now. Where's it going to be in March? I don't know, but for now, it's improving for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences I saw in this game against Butler than, let's say, that wasn't there versus Georgetown. At Georgetown was they got the lead and they still, with 2 minutes left, they still try to go.
Yes.
Shot every 10 seconds. This time, they're, you know what, slow it down. Let's get 20 to 25 seconds. You know, and I really think this game for St. John's, their defense closed out the win, you know, because they did give up some open threes.
Yeah.
But Villanova's probably going to hit those shots. Butler, not so much. But you did see the improvement on defense, and Butler is designed, I think, to play from ahead. You know, they
absolutely
did that too. So I think that was one thing to solve. But I think a major change is, or I would say a weakness compared to last season. I don't know if it's the talent or whatever, but the pressing, the full court press, it's nowhere near as effective as it was last year. Now, this could be, you could say it's because of talent change, because Nick Rutherford, Mustafa Heron, and LJ Figueroa are gone. You could say that was a lot of size there, which makes it easier to trap, or the Big East got used to it. What do you think is the reason why the press isn't as effective as, let's say, it has been last year at this time of the season?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. You know, people obviously were upset when we lost LJ to transfer to Oregon. But I think we've seen, at least in the first couple of games of Big East play, his loss on the defensive end, along with losing someone like Nick Rutherford and even Mustafa Heron, but especially LJ and Rutherford, you know, they were bigger losses, I think, on the defensive end, especially Rutherford, than the offensive end for this team. And it's like you mentioned, you know, LJ is an incredibly athletic guy. You know, Nick Rutherford was a pest for other opposing point guards. You know, those guys on the defensive end were big losses. And it's like you mentioned, you know, how many times this season have we seen them try to trap a guy? They don't trap a guy. They don't trap. You know, the ball goes to half court, and then there's an open three. You know, 2 seconds later, it's been over and over again this season. LJ kind of gave them, like you said, that length, that size on the defensive end, and even closing out shooters as well. Like that's a, you know, a small part of it as well. They've been terrible on their closeouts this season. They've been out of place a lot. So, I mean, you talk about one thing that's gotten worse. It's been the 3-point defense for sure. It wasn't great last year, but I think LJ and Rutherford really covered up a lot of those issues, whereas this year those guys aren't there, and they've been kind of killed from 3-point range.
Yeah, I definitely think, especially watching Creighton. I guess the good news is they don't play Creighton anymore.
Yeah.
But now let me ask you this question, because I think the most impressive win for St. John's last season was at home, where they beat Creighton by 20. And of course, they got it where they were playing a game when the world stopped, where St. John's had the lead at halftime. Now, do you think most of the Creighton players were returning? They remembered that game, and they're like, okay, we got to return it twice to them. Do you think that kind of impacted that?
Yeah, a little bit for sure. Definitely the game in Carnesecca. I think, you know, if you're a Creighton player who's returning, you know, you remember that you lost by 20 points to an unranked St. John's team, who was kind of, you know, lower bottom of the Big East at that point. So that's definitely in the back of their head. And that's, you know, a motivation things. You know, these schools are all rivals. You know, they all don't like each other. It doesn't take much to get up for games. And if you're Creighton, you know, I'm sure that the Creighton players have heard a lot too, you know, St. John's fans at least saying, hey, we were up at the half against them in the Big East tournament. Like, that's something as well. You know, would St. John's have won that game? I don't know. But that was probably in the back of Creighton players' heads to, you know, kind of prove to us fans and maybe even the players that, you know, they're a lot better than us, at least this season.
I think Creighton's a different team, and just imagine if Tyshawn Alexander. That's something that's a little bit scary. But now looking forward, you know, what do you think are some of the favorable matchups going forward for St. John's? They finished up with Georgetown. They finished up with Creighton. Going forward, what do you think are some of the favorable matchups? And what do you think are going to be some of the more difficult matchups for St. John's within the Big East? Yeah,
I mean, you know, they've historically done relatively well against DePaul, even, you know, with their program struggling. I know that they lost 2 straight to them in 2018, I think it was. But they've done well against DePaul. They should be able to win at least one, maybe even both games against DePaul. You know, you saw last night they matched up really well against Butler. So that's, you know, and I still think that they match up decently against Seton Hall. Or, you know, not decently, but I don't think Seton Hall is going to do anything that's going to, you know, blow you out of the gym, especially when you're playing them at home. You know, so those are winnable games, but, you know, the question is, how many games do you win against, you know, Marquette and Providence, and your other game against Xavier and even UConn? You know, that middle portion of the Big East, those, you know, middle 4 teams, how many wins do you get in the 7 or 6 games that you have remaining against those teams? If you can get, you know, 2-3 wins, then this is going to be a, you know, a very different outlook on the season than we have right now, where you're kind of saying this is a lower, bottom half Big East team. So how many wins do they get against those, 4 teams, that Xavier, Marquette, Seton Hall, and Providence? How many wins do they get against those teams? We'll see.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned Seton Hall is an interesting prospect because when you cross the river, bad things happen. I think there's the Seton Hall screw job, which St. John's fans have not forgotten, and neither have Seton Hall fans. But I really think the last few games at Madison Square Garden between St. John's and Seton Hall, they've been rock fights.
Yeah.
To say the least. They got up to the big lead. Miles Powell was able to close out the game against them this year. But I think that's something else, too, that could be interesting going forward. But now let me ask you this question, for St. John's season to be a success, according to you, Troy, what do you think it would need to be a success?
I would like to get out of the bottom 4 somehow. Okay. If you can just get to 7th in the conference, I honestly would call that, at this point, knowing what we know about this team, I would probably say that's a successful season, because like I said, I think that right now you're in that class, that lower class with Butler, Georgetown, and DePaul. So, obviously that would give you an 8th place finish at the highest, that you could go right now. Let's get to 7th and just see what happens. Can you jump, Marquette or Providence or Xavier if they fall off a little bit? Can you jump one of those teams? Maybe, I don't know, but they're probably not going to win more than 6, 7, 8, conference games at the most. So, you're probably going to finish below 500 in the conference, but can you get out of that lower, echelon of teams, which they just feel like they've been stuck in, year after year after year? It would be nice to at least show a little bit of improvement in year 2 of the Anderson era. So we'll see, but that would be my definition of success this season.
Yeah, I think when you really look at it, the team that's really been agonizing for the last few years has been Xavier. Because when you really look at St. John's, they at least got a win against Creighton. They even got some wins against Villanova. They got some wins against Seton Hall. But it seems like ever since Steve Lavin left, the whole Mullen era, they cannot have beat Xavier. So I think that's kind of their bugaboo. They came very, very close last year. But, we'll definitely see what happens. But now I'm going to close. Now, before we close, I want to make sure everyone here, if you haven't done so already, click that like button, click that subscribe button to Sports Talk Line, where you can see Battle for the Big East dropping every week. But before we go, Troy, I'm going to ask you this question. If you follow a St. John's game, they always say there are 3 head coaches with 15 plus years experience and not a losing season. It's last year it was 4 with Roy Williamson, but he had a losing season. So it's Mark Few at Gonzaga, who, for all we know, Gonzaga is going to go undefeated and win a national title.
I think they're going to keep that going.
You have Tom Izzo at Michigan State, and you have Mike Anderson. Okay, so I believe St. John's is 7-6 right now. They have 13 games in, so they already have enough games to qualify for an NCAA tournament. Do you see overall? We're not talking in conference. Overall, do you see St. John's still having a winning record at the end of the season?
Yeah, I don't at this point. I hate to be pessimistic for all the Red Storm fans out there, but it's going to be tough because, like you mentioned, I mean, as of right now, I think it's only Big East games left on the schedule unless they throw something else in there. And you still got to play Villanova twice. You still got to play UConn twice. Seton Hall, you still got to play. I mean, there's some tough games coming up. And like I said, I don't see them winning, more than 6, 7, 8 games in the conference, like I mentioned. So that puts you, below 500 in the conference, depending on how many conference games you realistically play. But if you play the 20 and you go, 7-13, I don't think that would be enough to get you over 500. Maybe, I'm not sure if it would. Maybe it would get you close, but it's going to be a tough task to even get to 7 wins in the conference, to be honest. So I'm hopeful, maybe they can step up at the end of the year, in late February and early March, like they did last year, where they won a couple of games at the end there to keep the streak going. But as of right now, no, I don't see that streak continuing for Anderson. I think if it was a normal year and we had played, the 11, 12, 13 non-conference games, and they were, 10-2 in the non-conference, then absolutely they would have, I think, kept it going. But because they only got, I think, the 6 non-conference games in, that just wasn't a chance to pile up wins like in the past, for Anderson and for this team. So unfortunately, I see that streak ending this year.
All right. Troy, before you leave, can you tell people where they can find you on Twitter and what other endeavors you do related to St. John's and college basketball?
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Troy Mauriello. The last name is Mauriello. I do the Seeing Red podcast. It covers St. John's. We do about one episode per week. Usually in the midweek, we have an episode talking about the Butler game up from last night. So you can check me out on there. I try to do some periscopes as well if you follow me on Twitter post game. So definitely check those out. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man.
All right, Troy. Thanks for coming on. And remember, if you haven't done so, click that like and subscribe button on YouTube. And remember to listen like you play with intensity.